Ned Stark stood at the top of the steps overlooking the Great Hall, the lines of tension etched into his face deeper than a mountain gorge. The torches cast flickering shadows across the cold, polished floor, and every breath carried the weight of fresh anxieties. He had thought himself an honorable man, a man who could do what was right even in the face of impossible choices. Yet the realm had begun to shift in ways he could scarcely fathom, and he felt a trembling in his bones that warned him the worst was yet to come. He had hoped to maintain a fragile peace, but the cost of that peace was rising higher than any man's conscience could bear. He swallowed. His lips felt dry, and the taste of dust seemed to cling to his tongue. The letter he held in his hand was crumpled and sweat-stained, a testament to the stress roiling inside him. He stared at it as if the parchment itself were cursed. Cersei Lannister had come to him in secret, in the middle of the night, eyes full of both venom and desperate hope. She had found him alone in his solar, told him truths he never imagined she would confess, and offered to strike a deal so shocking that for a moment he thought he was dreaming. But it was real. The tension in his stiff back attested to that reality. He had known from the moment he realized the parentage of her children that everything had changed. And now, in her fear of Robert, in her desperation for the safety of her children, and possibly for some twisted longing for her own kind of freedom, Cersei had said something unthinkable. She wanted out of the marriage. She wanted it ended before Robert discovered her secret. She wanted the king's blessing for a divorce she knew she could never obtain. She was convinced that the king would kill her. And she was convinced that her father, Tywin Lannister, would respond by unleashing a horde of Lannister bannermen upon the realm, igniting war from the Westerlands to the neck. It was a wretched tangle of deceit and loyalty, cunning and personal pride. Yet, there was a spark in her eyes that told Ned she was truly considering a future where she was no longer bound to Robert Baratheon. Robert had always been a man quick to anger, quick to drink, and too slow to see the webs forming around him. But a formal legal dissolution of the royal marriage was an event with implications so vast Ned could hardly keep track of them. She had begged him to help. Or maybe not begged. Cersei was too proud for that. Perhaps the better word was demanded, though cloaked in honeyed words. What she had promised in return was that she would vanish into a quiet life, away from King's Landing, with any children not fathered by Robert. She would not claim her children's right to the Iron Throne if Robert or the realm agreed to set them aside with no retribution. In her words, it was an act of mercy. A fatherless queen and her fatherless princes and princess stepping aside so the king could find a new bride, maybe even father new heirs with purer lineage. Yet Ned knew the truth was far more complicated. He glanced down again at the letter in his hand. It was her letter, sealed and addressed to him, offering the details of her proposed arrangement. The bulk of the text was a tangled web of legalities, demands, and concessions. She offered hush money, control of certain trade routes, and political alliances with lesser houses to smooth the process. It was, in short, a bribe with a core of raw desperation. Ned's sense of honor flickered like a guttering candle flame, for he knew he had to consider it carefully. The realm stood on a sword's edge. Another open conflict with the Lannisters would erupt into war, and Ned had no illusions of how costly such a war would be. He thought of his daughters, Sansa and Arya, caught in King's Landing. He thought of his sons back in Winterfell, far to the north, but never truly safe. He thought of the ghosts of the last rebellion, the memories of the horrors still fresh in his mind. Cersei's arrangement might just keep the realm from plunging into bloodshed, if it worked. But if it were discovered the wrong way, if Robert felt deceived, or if Tywin Lannister refused to accept terms, the fires of war would burn across the Seven Kingdoms. Ned closed his eyes, recalling the faint line on Cersei's brow when she had whispered the final words before vanishing into the dim corridor. "Do this, Lord Stark, or your precious honor will drown in rivers of blood." He stepped forward and began to descend the steps into the great hall. Morning light was beginning to wash through the high windows, painting the floor in pale gold. The footsteps of the guards behind him echoed off the vaulted ceilings. He had not told anyone of Cersei's plan, not even Littlefinger or Varys or Renly. But he knew each of them sensed something amiss. Something stirring in the air. The lords and ladies of the court had grown restless, picking up on the tension that coiled around the castle like a serpent. Eyes followed Ned everywhere he went. He could practically hear the whispers even when no one spoke. He moved through the quiet corridors with a determined gait. The lion had come to the wolf, and the wolf had not snapped. Instead, the wolf listened. He reflected on the memory of that conversation in his soul again. How Cersei had stood there in the flickering candlelight, her golden hair shimmering as she refused to sit. She had delivered her piece while remaining on her feet, lips curled in that mocking smile that never quite reached her eyes. And then, after delivering her demands, she had offered just enough vulnerability, just enough truth, to tie Ned's conscience in knots. Could he do it? Could he set aside her crimes for the sake of peace? The king's children, no, not the king's children, but Jaime's, would be barred from succession in any formal agreement. But the realm might be spared the clash of steel that seemed otherwise inevitable. Was that enough to condone her deception? Was that enough to relinquish the last vestiges of justice? He remembered the hush in the corridor as Cersei waited for his response, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. He had not even given her one. He had told her he must think. A swirl of emotions crashed through him, but the one that surprised him the most was pity. For Cersei, yes, but also for the realm itself, captive to the whims and secrets of those who sat on the Iron Throne, or near it. Perhaps it was not justice for her to walk free, to be absolved of her lies. But Ned Stark was a man who bore the memory of war too keenly. He had marched south once in the name of family, honor, and the rightful king. He had seen bodies strewn across fields, heard the lamentations of widows and orphans. If there was a way to keep the peace, even if it meant swallowing bitterness and doubt, should he not at least consider it? His hesitation, he knew, might invite disaster. Yet he had come to a conclusion that morning, pacing his chamber until the light of dawn, hands shaking with the weight of it. He would give Cersei an avenue. He would bring her plan before the king. Not as her plan, of course, but couched in diplomatic terms. Something to do with preserving the stability of the realm, clarifying the line of succession, forging an honorable path forward. He would not betray the crown. He would tell Robert the truth, at least enough of it, that the marriage was fruitless, loveless, doomed, that Cersei had offered to end it peacefully, step aside, accept terms in exchange for her life, and for the safety of her children. Robert might balk, might laugh, might even rage, but there was a chance, however slim, that he would see the logic in it. If only he could be guided there without letting his fury at the Lannisters blind him. Ned trembled inwardly at the thought. Robert was not known for measured responses, least of all in matters that so intimately touched his pride. But perhaps that was where Ned himself could intervene, provide the calm voice. Divorcing the queen would be scandal enough, but if the alternative was war, maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to stay Robert's wrath. And if Tywin Lannister accepted the terms rather than plunging his house into a conflict that might jeopardize everything he had built, perhaps the realm could survive. Perhaps another rebellion would not be necessary. He stepped through a narrow doorway and entered a smaller council chamber, one lined with tall, narrow windows. The council table was empty, save for the dust motes drifting in the sunlight. Ned wondered how many hushed confessions and whispered threats had played out in these halls over the years. He laid the letter down on the table, smoothing its creases. He was due to meet with Robert within the hour, alone if possible, to broach this dangerous topic. The king had summoned him to go over the finances of a tournament planned to celebrate the name day of Prince Joffrey, though the boy was not truly a prince by blood. Ned felt a pang of guilt at the deception, but that was overshadowed by the heavier dread of what might happen if Robert discovered everything in the worst possible way. He heard footsteps in the corridor, the clank of armor, and recognized Sir Barristan Selmy's calm voice. Ned took a deep breath, preparing himself, trying to focus on the immediate step rather than the avalanche it might unleash. He had to approach Robert carefully. He had to measure his words. A single hint of condemnation might set Robert's rage ablaze. A single miscalculation might set off the Lannister pride. Yet Ned had decided, better to hold the line, better to risk the precarious path than wait for the storm to break. War could still be averted. He had to believe that. As Sir Barristan stepped into the room, Ned glanced over and offered a tight nod. The Lord Commander of the Kingsguard seemed to sense Ned's burden. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then paused, as though uncertain what to say. Finally, he offered a respectful inclination of his head and said, "The king awaits Lord Stark." Ned followed him in silence, his cloak swishing behind him on the polished floor. He replayed in his mind what he would say, how he might present this monstrous notion of a royal divorce. He imagined Robert's eyes widening, his voice booming, spittle flying if he took offense. But Ned also imagined the flicker of realization, the glimmer of hope, that maybe Robert could finally break from a marriage that had made him miserable and left him longing for the dead woman he had once loved. Lyanna Stark, Ned's own sister. They reached the king's solar. The guards outside moved aside, letting Ned pass through. Robert Baratheon stood by the window, a flagon of wine in his hand, though it was still barely past sunrise. He wore no crown. His dark hair was streaked with gray, and his once strong frame had grown thick around the middle. He turned with a half-amused, half-tired look in his eyes as Ned entered. "Gods, Ned, you look like you've not slept," Robert said by way of greeting, his voice gruff and tinged with morning impatience. "Come, let's hear these confounded numbers. You're about to tell me we're too far in debt to pay for a damn pup's name day tourney, aren't you?" Ned managed a small, weary smile. "Something like that, Your Grace." He bowed, noticing the swirl of wine in Robert's cup. Already he could smell the sweet odor. Robert frowned and motioned impatiently. "Go on then. Let's have it." Ned steeled himself. How to begin? He had half a mind to simply hand Robert the letter, but that would be disastrous. He had to speak softly, coax the king along. So he began with talk of the costs for the tourney, the coin Littlefinger had found, the demands of the realm. Robert half listened, tossing in a grunt or a curse when he heard sums that displeased him. Ned had the conversation to meander, watching for an opening, a moment where Robert might show some measure of introspection or willingness to discuss deeper matters. But Robert was not in a patient mood. He drained his cup too quickly, signaled for more wine, and set his jaw. Finally, Ned felt the time to hesitate was passing swiftly. He mustered his courage. "Your Grace," he said quietly, "there is another matter. One more pressing than your son's name day, I fear." Robert met his gaze. "And what's that?" Ned's heart pounded. He forced himself to keep his voice level. "Your marriage, Your Grace." At once, the king's cheeks colored. He let out a sharp bark of laughter that held little true mirth. "Is this about the nonsense with the whores I bedded last week? Or last night, or whichever it was? I already have a wife, Ned, and you've never been one to wag your finger at me over that." Ned kept his expression grave. "It's not that, Your Grace. It's the state of your marriage to the Queen. If I may speak frankly, it serves neither you nor the realm." "Nabinti." Robert's eyes flickered. Hope edge touched his tone. "You're bold this morning, Stark. What do you mean by that?" Ned inhaled. This was the moment. He reached into his doublet and drew forth Cersei's letter, though he made sure to keep his hand covering any Lannister's sigil. "I have been informed, Your Grace, that there may be a way to end this marriage without inciting a war, if that is your wish. A formal separation, one that spares your queen and leaves you free to pursue another match. Mender Sox." Robert stared as though the very idea were an affront to his senses. Silence hung heavy for a moment. Then he let out a disbelieving laugh, but it was forced. "You jest? Divorce? That's a notion for Essos, not for the Seven Kingdoms." Ned did not blink. "I would not speak of it if I had not been given reason to believe it might be arranged. There are our parties who would agree to discreet terms to ensure that House Lannister does not rise in rebellion. An amicable end, if such a thing is possible." "My Arad." The king's mirth faded. Now his expression turned wary, suspicious. "Who told you of this, and what do they want in return?" Ned chose his words carefully. I cannot name them, but I can tell you the proposition is genuine. It would require some compromise, but it would be a means to spare your house and the realm further discord. I know this weighs heavily on your mind, Robert, for you have long confided that your marriage brings you no joy. Anger flickered across Robert's face. He set his wine down with a decisive thud. I have half a mind to call you a traitor for even whispering such treason, Ned. His tone was harsh, but his eyes betrayed curiosity. Yet you're my friend, and you've risked your honor to bring this to me, I can see it. So speak plainly. Why in the seven hells would the Lannisters give up their hold on the throne so willingly? Ned felt a drop of sweat roll down his temple. He took a measured step toward Robert. Because, Your Grace, I believe they fear your reaction if the truth were to come out. The truth about the Queen? About her indiscretions. They think it best to remove themselves quietly rather than stoke the dragon's fire. If they can negotiate terms that protect certain interests, they may prefer that path to open war. Mentor. Robert stared at Ned, then turned to gaze out the window. The city spread beneath them, King's Landing with all its chaotic sprawl. You speak in riddles, Ned. Are you telling me that the Lannisters, Cersei in particular, want me to set her aside, that she would leave quietly? Ned almost let slip the entire truth, that the children were not Robert's, that he had discovered the secret that threatened to tear the realm asunder. But he decided, in that moment, that the timing was not right. Instead, he said, Yes, Your Grace. I believe that is the gist of it. This is only a conversation for now, but if you were willing to consider it, I could see a path that spares the realm from the turmoil we've both feared. Robert let out a heavy exhale. He looked at Ned, truly looked at him, as though seeing the man beneath the title of hand. For a moment, the king's face softened, showing the burden he carried, the disappointment in the marriage that never matched his boyhood dreams of love. Damn you, Ned, he murmured. Damn you for tempting me with such a prospect. Part of me wants to leap at it, to rid myself of that viper's nest. But the other part, this is unprecedented. A king can't simply set aside a queen like discarding a meal. Even if she came from a lesser house, the realm would talk. But Lannisters? Tywin would never allow it, not unless he had no other choice. Ned offered a gentle nod. That is precisely why we must tread carefully. But if we do, there could be a chance to do this with minimal bloodshed. Robert snorted. Minimal bloodshed. Gods, you speak like a fool, but I suppose it's better than a butcher. He paused, rolling his shoulders as though trying to shift an invisible weight. I'll think on it. Gods know I never wanted this life. I wanted Lyanna. But that's old talk, and it does me no good now. Leave me, Ned. Let me weigh this in peace. But swear to me that you haven't shared this madness with anyone else. Ned exhaled, relief and worry mingling. I swear, Your Grace, only you. Robert nodded curtly. Then go, and get me more wine. Ned bowed and departed, leaving the king to stare out at the city. As the door closed behind him, Ned's head spun. That had been a mere step, a half measure. But it was done. Robert had heard the notion without throwing Ned in irons. And though anger had flickered in his eyes, Ned saw the longing there too. The longing for a release from a union that had never borne him any true heirs, any true happiness. Perhaps in that longing lay the seed of acceptance. Perhaps, just perhaps, this outrageous plan could work. Yet as Ned returned to the council chamber and sank into a chair, he felt the storm brewing in his gut. Divorcing Cersei would be a scandal that could rock the realm. Rumors would spread like wildfire. The faith might object, lords might question the king's authority, and Tywin Lannister might respond in ways beyond imagining. Another rebellion could spark, and the blood toll would be high. Ned closed his eyes, imagining the ravens flying, the horns sounding, the armies gathering. He had made his move. Now the pieces on the board would shift. The next days, weeks, even hours, would be critical. Time stretched into midday. Ned tried to conduct ordinary business. A brief meeting with the Master of Coin, a discussion of shipping lanes with the Master of Ships. But his mind was elsewhere. He kept going over possible scenarios, how to proceed. One path involved carefully telling Robert the full truth of Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen's parentage. But how and when? Another path might be to allow the dissolution to proceed under less explosive pretenses, letting Cersei claim estrangement or a private arrangement. Each path carried its own perils. Late in the afternoon, Ned took a solitary walk along the walls of the Red Keep. The sun was warm on his shoulders, and the gulls cried overhead. From the high vantage, he could see ships in Blackwater Bay, small as toys, sails bright against the sapphire water. He thought of the north, of the wide fields of Winterfell, of the Godswood where he had once prayed for guidance. Here, in the south, everything felt so entangled, so fraught with hidden agendas. Honor was so much simpler beneath the weirwood trees. He reached a corner turret where he found Varys, the master of whisperers, leaning casually against the stone battlements as though waiting for him. Varys turned with a knowing smile. "My Lord Hand," he greeted. "Such a lovely day, is it not? The kind of day when one imagines the world might be at peace." Ned's suspicion roused. "Lord Varys." Varys' expression was unreadable. "I have heard interesting rumors, Lord Stark, about an unorthodox solution to a certain royal predicament. One wonders if the realm is heading toward a quiet resolution or a thunderous confrontation." The Bimbi. Ned felt an urge to deny everything, but he knew better than to lie to Varys. "Rumors get around quickly in King's Landing. I suppose that is your handiwork." Varys dipped his head politely. "I merely listen, and I have heard that the Queen is in an especially pensive mood today. A mood quite unlike her usual fierceness. Whispers abound of secret meetings, hush-hush letters, the small folk gossip that changes in the air. Tell me if you will. Are we on the brink of something momentous?" Ned frowned. "One might say that, or it might be naught but rumors and speculation. That is often the way of this city." Varys clasped his hands together. "True, true. King's Landing does love a scandal. Yet I sense the wheel turning. If the king were to attempt to set aside his queen, the slightest misstep could ignite Tywin Lannister's wrath. Is there a plan to quell that, I wonder?" Ned let out a slow breath. "Varys, if you were here to warn me, I've already weighed the risks." "Have you weighed them all, my lord?" "Has the king?" "War, instability, the shredding of alliances. House Lannister is not alone in its pride. What would the Tyrells think? The Martells? Even the Greyjoys might see opportunity amid chaos. Rebellion can sprout from the smallest seeds when the realm's leadership shows a crack." Ned stared out over the city. "What choice do we have? If the marriage remains, we risk a worse conflict when truths emerge. This path might spare us needless bloodshed." Varys nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps. But be cautious, Lord Stark. The realm is a tapestry of knives behind silken threads. One pull of the thread and the knives may come down." He placed a hand on Ned's shoulder in an oddly paternal gesture. "But I know you mean well. And for that, I commend you. You are a rare man in this place." Ned offered a curt nod, not fully trusting the eunuch's sincerity. Varys gave a slight bow and departed, leaving Ned alone to brood in the afternoon sun. The day wore on, and Ned decided that his next step must be to speak with Cersei again, ensure that she would not provoke Robert into a rage. He had risked everything to even bring the notion to the king. If Cersei lost her nerve now, if she tried to revert to threats or cunning manipulations, it might be too late to prevent the confrontation they both feared. As evening approached, Ned arranged for a discreet meeting. He sent a message through a trusted guard to the Queen, asking for a moment of her time in the gardens. The sun was sinking below the horizon, the sky tinged with pink and orange. Torchlight illuminated the paths among the carefully trimmed hedges. The scents of lavender and rose filled the warm air. Ned found Cersei standing by a marble bench, her hands clasped before her, wearing a gown of deep green that contrasted with her golden hair. As he approached, she lifted her chin, her eyes cool yet expectant. "Lord Stark, I received your note." Ned bowed slightly. "Your Grace, I spoke with the king." She did not move. but he saw her fingers twitch slightly. And Ned allowed a moment to pass. He is considering it. Her gaze flickered, betraying a mixture of relief and disbelief. Is that so? I had imagined him either flying into a rage or refusing outright. Nenderal. Thus far, he's doing neither, but I must caution you not to incite him. If you press too hard or if you gloat, he could turn violent. Cersei's lips curved in a humorless smile. Do not presume to lecture me on how to deal with Robert. I've endured his boorish moods for too many years to count. Ned swallowed a retort. This must be managed carefully. We cannot afford to let rumor run wild before the formalities are set. We must ensure that Tywin Lannister does not see this as a personal affront so severe that he calls his banners. You must do your part. Cersei's eyes grew distant. I will leave if I must, if that ensures the safety of my children. They are what matter. Their lives, their futures. Ned's voice grew stern. They will not have a place in the line of succession. You understand that? Her gaze snapped to him, cold as winter's wind. So you say, but we shall see. I want them free from harm, not robbed of a birthright. But if it keeps them alive, I will agree to the appearance of it. Let him so. Ned felt a surge of misgiving. A deception then. But it must be ironclad, or Robert will never consent. He might demand proof. She cut him off, a sardonic laugh escaping her lips. Proof? Of what? All he wants is to be rid of me without the realm exploding. If that means forging some legal pretense and letting me claim we never consummated the marriage to my satisfaction. Oh, the irony. Then so be it. Ned's jaw tightened. This is no jest. One wrong step, and thousands could die. Cersei's expression hardened. You think I don't know that? This is my life, Stark, and the life of my children. And you do this because of your precious honor, or so you tell yourself. Very well. We have an agreement for now. But be warned. If Robert seeks to harm my children, I'll burn this realm to the ground before letting him. Ned felt the hair on the back of his neck prickle. Do not threaten me, or the king. If we're to see this through, we must act in concert. Let me do what I can to calm Robert. You keep the peace until a formal arrangement is made. Then. She made no reply, but her silence conveyed a fragile acceptance. The garden torches flickered in the soft breeze. In that moment, Ned felt the hush of the evening envelop them, felt the precarious calm that lay over the Red Keep. He wondered if, in the quiet of the night, the seeds of rebellion were stirring, ready to burst forth if the slightest spark ignited the tinder. For now, the realm held its breath. They parted ways without further ceremony. Ned walked back to the castle interior. Heart heavy, mind aflame with possibilities. He could almost hear the shuffle of whispered secrets through the corridors. He could sense the watchful gaze of men like Littlefinger and the Hound. Above all, he could practically taste the tension in the air. Night fell. In the privacy of his chambers, Ned sought a few hours of rest. He tossed and turned, dreams plagued by images of armies clashing, the roar of dragons that no longer existed in the world, the shriek of ravens carrying messages of betrayal. He dreamt of the north in flames, of Sansa and Arya crying out for him. When he woke in a cold sweat, the moonlight streamed through the window. The hush of the castle was almost eerie. Outside, the city slept fitfully, unaware that their king might soon cast aside his queen. Or perhaps the city was stirring with rumors as it always did. The next day dawned gray and overcast, as though the heavens themselves were uncertain. Ned rose, bathed, and prepared himself for his duties. He dreaded crossing paths with Robert, but also knew their conversations must continue if any real plan were to emerge. Sure enough, a messenger arrived early, summoning Ned to join the king for a private ride outside the city walls. Robert was not a man for subtlety, so perhaps this was his attempt to clear the air. They rode out in the mid-morning, just the two of them, along with a small contingent of guards who kept a respectful distance. Robert's horse was a war horse of impressive stature, but the king's belly and heavy seat made the mount labor as they climbed a gentle hill overlooking fields of tall grass. The noise of the city faded behind them, replaced by rustling leaves and the occasional chirp of birds. The king reined in at the top of the hill, letting out a long sigh that seemed to carry ages of regret. "Look at it, Ned," he said, gesturing at the farmland, the dirt roads meandering toward the horizon. "Sometimes I forget this is all one realm. So many little lives, so many folk with no notion of the game we play in the capital. The decisions we make, the bargains we strike, it's they who pay if we falter." Ned nodded, surprised at the king's moment of introspection. "Yes, your grace. We must keep that in mind." "Messenito." Robert blew out a breath and turned his mount in a slow circle. "Last night, I dreamed of the Trident, of Rhaegar Targaryen, of the rebellion. I dreamed I was back in my youth with a warhammer in my hands and fire in my heart. I almost woke feeling alive again." He trailed off, and Ned heard the unspoken sorrow for Lyanna. Ned watched him, remaining silent. Finally, Robert looked at him with weary eyes. "I thought about what you said, about the possibility of setting the queen aside. I do not know how it could be done without 100 lords screaming for blood. But I am tired, Ned. Tired of living a lie, tired of hating the woman who shares my bed, tired of siring no true heirs. You know what that means for me. You know what that does to my pride." "Nia." Ned bowed his head. "I do, your grace." Robert's voice hardened. "If I do this, I won't have the realm thinking me impotent, a cuckold. I want a reason the public can swallow. I want it done with no confusion that the fault lies with her. And after, I want to marry again. A woman who can bear me true-born sons." "Nimnaster." Ned's heart pounded. "If it is arranged in such a way that the fault lies with the queen, House Lannister may see it as an insult." Robert grunted. "They see everything as an insult, unless they get their way. Still, perhaps with some concessions. Fine. We'll see. I just want it done without war. But hear this, Ned. If the lions roar, I'll answer in kind. I will not be made a fool. You, as my hand, had best have a plan. I'm giving you the chance to propose how we proceed." "No." Ned suppressed the urge to protest that this had been the Queen's idea, that he was only the messenger. But Robert's eyes were fierce. It was clear that if Ned did not produce a workable path, Robert might revert to anger and let events spiral out of control. So Ned bowed respectfully. "I will seek a way, your grace. We must do this carefully, step by step." Robert nodded, then spurred his horse forward. They rode on, speaking little else, as though each recognized that the next moves were up to Ned, Cersei, and fate itself. The king retreated into his thoughts, and Ned found his own mind racing with the tasks ahead. He would need to gather what allies he could among the small council, perhaps confide in Renly or Sir Barristan, or even try to gauge the reaction of Tywin Lannister through a carefully worded letter. The risk was immense. One slip could lead to war. When they returned to the castle, Ned parted ways with Robert. He sought out Maester Pycelle in the library, under the pretext of researching historical precedents for annulling or dissolving royal marriages. The old maester blinked in surprise at Ned's interest, stroking his long white beard. "It is very rare in the history of the Seven Kingdoms to have such a matter broached, my lord hand. One might look to the annals of King Baelor the Blessed, or the case of—" Ned cut him off with a polite but firm request for relevant scrolls, not wishing to explain too much. Pycelle, intrigued, began rummaging through dusty shelves. The days of war might soon overshadow them all, yet here Ned stood, looking for ancient technicalities in old records. He spent hours scanning brittle parchments, eyes flicking over the words, searching for anything that might bolster the king's case without humiliating House Lannister too openly. He found references to marriages ended due to consanguinity or lack of consummation. He found records of marriages declared void by the High Septon for reasons of heresy or secret prior vows. But none seemed a perfect match. Still, there was enough to cobble together a possible justification if the king could claim the union had never truly been sanctified in the eyes of the Seven. Perhaps a well-placed donation to the faith would help. Perhaps an official condemnation, if certain rumors of unfaithfulness were discreetly corroborated. Ned grimaced. It was distasteful, but it might do. He closed the scrolls, exhaustion tugging at him. The flickering candlelight revealed his reflection in the polished table, revealing new lines etched around his eyes. His hair shot with more gray than before. He wondered if the price of peace was a piece of his own soul. Before he left, Maester Pycelle ambled over, curiosity plain. "My Lord Hand, if I may inquire, is this research for the king's personal inquiry, or for a more general interest in the law?" Ned forced a neutral tone. "I'm exploring all possibilities, Maester. Nothing more." He offered no further explanation and left the library, leaving Pycelle with only more questions. Later that night, the tension was palpable among the highborn. Court gatherings were subdued, and the Queen was conspicuously absent from the feast. Robert, for his part, ate and drank in silence, occasionally bellowing a curt remark at one of the servants. Sansa Stark sat with the other ladies, looking uncertain. Arya was nowhere in sight, likely off exploring corridors or skipping supper altogether. The Lannister presence was thin as well. Tyrion was away traveling. Kevan Lannister rarely appeared at court. Jaime remained on duty with the Kingsguard but kept his distance, eyes hawk-like beneath his golden hair. Ned was aware of those eyes on him, the measuring stare of the Kingslayer. Did Jaime suspect that Ned was facilitating Cersei's plan? If so, his hatred might burn even brighter. But Ned dared not approach him. The last thing he needed was a confrontation that might spark a rumor too soon. Days crept by in a slow, tense dance. Ned continued to gather references and pen potential decrees, meeting discreetly with Cersei in out-of-the-way courtyards or dim corridors to ensure their stories matched. The king grew impatient, cornering Ned at odd times, with a glare that demanded progress. The swirl of rumor around the Red Keep became a storm, with talk of the Queen's health failing, or of a new mistress for the king. Yet no one guessed the truth, that they were inching toward a royal divorce. At night, Ned found little rest. He often woke before dawn, pacing his chambers, haunted by the question, was he doing the right thing? Or was he merely postponing an inevitable war, at the cost of his own moral code? He had not denounced Cersei's crime. He had not revealed the truth of her children's parentage. He was, in fact, abetting a deception in the hope of staving off a greater disaster. He wondered if the old gods would forgive him. He wondered if he would forgive himself. And then came the day that changed everything. Word arrived that Tywin Lannister had been spotted leaving Casterly Rock, traveling with a significant host of soldiers. He was ostensibly riding to King's Landing in response to a summons from the king regarding taxes. But everyone knew that Tywin rarely traveled in such force unless he meant to send a message. Whispers flew like arrows through the Red Keep. Tywin was coming to assert his daughter's position, or to call the king to heel, or to prepare for war. Some said he had heard a rumor of an impending scandal. Others said he was simply visiting his grandchildren. Ned felt his mouth go dry when he heard. If Tywin arrived before a final arrangement was in place, negotiations might collapse under the weight of his pride. The king's new willingness to part with Cersei might vanish if Tywin threatened war. Or worse, Robert might greet the threat by calling his banners, plunging the realm into the very bloodshed Ned wanted to avoid. They had precious little time left. He consulted with Robert, whose face grew red with anger at the mere mention of Tywin's approach. "The old lion thinks he can intimidate me?" the king growled. "Fine, let him come. He'll find I'm no lapdog. We'll see who has the real power." Din. Ned tried to calm him, but Robert was already half drunk by midday. "We must finalize matters, Your Grace, before Lord Tywin's arrival. Announce the dissolution with the High Septon's blessing. Ensure certain concessions are offered to House Lannister. Sizable gold, trade privileges, something to salve their wounded pride. If Tywin sees a stable agreement, he may not risk open rebellion. Robert clenched his jaw. "I hate giving that old man anything, but I'll do it if it means no war. Get the High Septon on board, Ned. Make the arrangements. Call a council if you must." Ned sat here. Ned bowed and left, heart pounding. He hastened to do exactly that, summoning key figures of the small council to a private meeting in the Tower of the Hand, excluding Littlefinger, whose duplicity Ned did not trust, and excluding Pycelle, whose loyalty to the Lannisters was well known. He kept the circle small: himself, Renly Baratheon, and Ser Barristan Selmy. Men he believed might be swayed by the argument for peace. He outlined the plan. The king would declare the marriage void, citing irreconcilable differences, some claim of unfaithfulness or refusal of the bedchamber, carefully worded. The High Septon, who had been discreetly contacted, would perform the annulment. The crown would offer House Lannister substantial reparations, enough to pretend it was not an insult, but an amicable arrangement. In return, Cersei would depart King's Landing with her children, presumably to Casterly Rock, relinquishing all claim to the throne. Renly listened with wide-eyed shock. I had never thought to see the day when a king sets aside a queen like this. My brother must truly loathe her. Ned gave a grim nod. He does, but we do this to avoid a war, or at least that is my hope. Ser Barristan stroked his white beard. There will be many who question the children's legitimacy after such a separation. If they are publicly deemed no longer heirs, the realm may wonder. Well, wonders can lead to dangerous questions. Ned knew all too well what questions might arise. But he forced a measured response. Better a few rumors than open war. Let the rumors swirl. Let them call it political friction. As long as the great houses accept the settlement, we may keep the peace. Ma'am. Renly cast a side glance. And what if the Lannisters do not accept? Ned's expression hardened. Then the king is prepared to call the banners. But we pray it does not come to that. After the meeting, Ned felt the sense of a noose tightening around his neck. All these carefully laid plans depended on too many moving parts. On Robert's fragile patience, on Cersei's compliance, on Tywin's willingness to negotiate. One spark could burn it all to ash. And amidst it, Ned felt the burden of the secret he kept about the children. That secret was the very reason Cersei was so desperate to make a deal. If the realm at large discovered the truth, her children would be in mortal danger. House Lannister might choose war over disgrace. But Ned stayed silent, focusing on the delicate arrangement that might avert catastrophe. The day crept by, then the next. The air crackled with tension. Word came that Tywin's host was only a few days' ride from the capital. Robert paced in his solar, drinking heavily, muttering curses about Tywin and the Lannisters. Cersei withdrew from public appearances entirely, shutting herself in her chambers with her children. The city, ever attuned to drama, buzzed with anxious speculation. Finally, Ned received a summons from the High Septon himself, requesting an audience. The man was old, stooped with age, and wore richly embroidered robes. He sat in a small audience room within the great sept of Belor. Candles flickered around him, the scent of incense heavy in the air. As Ned bowed in respect, the High Septon regarded him with a contemplative gaze. It is a grave matter, Lord Stark, to dissolve a royal marriage. The faith has rarely sanctioned such a thing in the history of the Seven Kingdoms. Yet I sense you carry this burden in good conscience, believing it to be for the realm's benefit. Ned stood tall. Yes, Your Holiness. The king wishes to make amends with the Seven, to rectify a situation that has caused endless discord. I respectfully request the faith's blessing in guiding him toward a resolution that avoids widespread strife. Matins. The High Septon sighed. Strife is never the wish of the gods, yet men bring it upon themselves time and again. If the king provides suitable offerings to the faith, and if he makes a public vow that this step is taken in good faith, no pun intended, then we may proceed. Ned bowed, relief and trepidation mingling in his chest. Thank you, Your Holiness. The king will do as required. Very well, Lord Stark. May the Seven guide us all. The High Septon lifted a trembling hand in a sign of blessing. Ned left the sept with his heart pounding. They had the faith's tentative agreement, a crucial step, but the war drum still hovered on the edge of hearing. Tywin's approach meant that, if any part of this arrangement faltered, the Lannisters would have an army at King's Landing's doorstep. If an agreement was not reached, or if Tywin interpreted the annulment as an insult, the result would be catastrophic. That night, Ned met one final time with Cersei. She was in her chambers, glooming by the window, looking as though she had aged years in mere days. When he entered, The king's guard outside closed the door, leaving them in private. She turned to face Ned, eyes sharp with worry. "So," she said without preamble, "the king is moving forward with this plan of yours, and my father is nearly at the gates. Are we to see blood in the streets?" Ned shook his head. "Not if we finalize the settlement before your father arrives, or at least present him with terms that will let him save face." He paused, then took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You must be prepared to depart the city with your children the moment the annulment is declared. The king will not want you here once it's done." Cersei's face tensed at the mention of leaving King's Landing. She glanced over at a side table, where a portrait of her children was propped. "That is the price. I know. I have no illusions about what life will be like for us afterwards. But it is better than Robert's wrath." Ned exhaled. "Indeed." She turned back to him, her posture regal despite the tension. "For a moment, I almost pity the king. He will be left alone, with his throne and his regrets. But I suppose the realm will hail him as honorable for not slaughtering me outright." Ned said nothing. Compassion flickered within him, but he stamped it down. Too many had suffered from the Lannisters' machinations. Yet he recognized that at least she was trying to avoid a bloodbath now. They stood in silence for a moment, the flickering candlelight dancing on the walls. Then, abruptly, Cersei spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "You know, if I were a different woman, I might have found a different fate. But we are all trapped by our birth, by our house, by men's expectations. I only wanted to protect my children." Ned nodded, though he had no words that could bridge the gulf between them. He simply said, "We all want to protect our children." She held his gaze for a heartbeat, then turned away. Ned took that as a dismissal and quietly left, the door clicking shut behind him. His chest felt tight, as though he were caught in a vise. He thought of his own daughters, Sansa and Arya. He thought of how their lives might have been different had he never come south. Would the realm itself be safer? 2 days later, in the throne room, the king stood before a select gathering of lords and officials, Ned at his side. Robert's mood was grim. He wore his crown, and the majesty of the Iron Throne loomed behind him. Cersei stood to one side, pale but composed, flanked by a pair of Kingsguard. A hush fell over the hall as Robert's proclamation was read by a herald. In stilted formal language, it declared that the king and queen's union was null, that the marriage had been improperly sanctified, that the queen was to be set aside with appropriate courtesy, and that the children born of the queen would not be recognized as heirs to the throne. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the witnesses. This was history, an event unheard of in their lifetimes. Ned scanned the crowd, seeing shock on many faces. He thought he detected simmering anger on Jaime Lannister's face, but the Kingsguard did not move. Robert stood silent, gripping a scepter so tightly his knuckles turned white. The High Septon, escorted by acolytes, stepped forward to bestow a brief ceremonial dissolution. Though his voice was calm, his eyes darted about anxiously, as if he expected chaos to erupt at any moment. Once the formalities were done, Robert turned to Cersei. There was no affection in his eyes, only a sort of dull resentment. "Go," he said. "Go to Casterly Rock, or wherever pleases you best, and trouble me no further. You are no longer my wife or my queen." Nabinuna. Cersei inclined her head, a brittle gesture that might have been a bow. She spoke no words in return. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen were not present in the throne room, spared the spectacle. Ned suspected they were being ready to depart the city. A tension hung in the air so thick it felt suffocating. With that, Cersei turned and walked from the hall, her back straight, giving no one the satisfaction of seeing her tears, if she had any to shed. The hush lingered. Then, slowly, lords and courtiers began to murmur. This was done. The king had freed himself from the queen, an event that would reverberate through the realm. Ned stood by Robert's side, feeling neither triumph nor relief, only a dreadful anticipation. Tywin Lannister was but a day away now. How would he react? Would he accept the fait accompli, gather his daughter and grandchildren, and retreat? Or would he see this as the greatest insult to House Lannister since the downfall of Aerys Targaryen. Would he raise his banners in fury? Robert turned to Ned, looking strangely hollow despite this victory. "It's done," he said in a rough whisper. "I've set her aside." Ned inclined his head. "Yes, Your Grace." Robert swallowed hard, then raised his voice to the gathering. "Out. All of you. I would speak with my hand alone." The crowd dispersed, many eager to spread word of the extraordinary event. When the hall was empty save for the guards, Robert sagged, removing the crown from his head and setting it heavily upon the Iron Throne's twisted metal arm. "Ned," he said, "did we just save the realm? Or doom it?" Ned had no easy answer. "We'll know soon enough, Your Grace." Outside, the banners of House Lannister were drawing closer. The seeds of a new rebellion had perhaps already taken root. In the days that followed, the realm would hold its breath to see if Tywin Lannister bowed to this outcome, or called his banners in a bid for revenge. And Ned Stark, torn between duty and honor, would stand at the center of the storm, praying that the realm might yet be spared another war, all while suspecting deep in his bones that the gods had only begun to toy with their fates. Over the next 3 days, the tension in King's Landing grew so thick it felt like a physical presence, pressing on every hallway, every courtyard, every breath. The whispers of the court buzzed with feverish speculation. Merchants, gold cloaks, stable boys, everyone seemed to sense that a storm was about to break. The city's mood felt poised on a knife's edge, and there was hardly a soul who did not speak of the Lannister host marching closer by the hour. Ned Stark rose before dawn each morning, as though hoping the soft gray light might grant him clarity. He would gaze out his window toward the sunrise, trying to steady his mind for whatever fresh trials the day brought. He had done all he could to push through the king's annulment and to secure the High Septon's cooperation. Yet the day the decree was pronounced, he had barely slept a wink, worrying over Tywin Lannister's reaction. Now that the deed was done, the tension clawed at him even more. Early on the morning, Tywin's banners appeared on the horizon. Ned stood on the battlements of the Red Keep, watching the gold and crimson flags ripple in the distance. The sun was pale and hazy, shrouded by thin clouds that gave the day a muted, ominous cast. Beside him stood Ser Barristan Selmy and a smattering of guards. No one spoke. They simply watched a long line of horsemen crest a gentle rise and win their way toward the city gates. Ned's stomach tightened as he counted the numbers. 2,000 at least. Cavalry, foot soldiers, and a small train of wagons. Not a full army, yet enough to remind the king that House Lannister could not be trifled with. Ned swallowed hard. Would Tywin ride in to collect his daughter and grandchildren peacefully? Or was this force a prelude to open conflict? Either way, the day's confrontation could shape the fate of the 7 kingdoms for years to come. Ser Barristan cleared his throat. "My Lord Hand, shall I prepare the king's guard to meet Lord Tywin at the gate?" Ned nodded, forcing calm into his voice. "Yes." The king ordered a formal reception. "I will join you, along with a detachment of gold cloaks." They left the battlements and hurried through the courtyard. The air was unusually cool for that time of year, as though the skies brooded. Servants dashed about in anxious haste, carrying fresh rushes or adjusting tapestries, clearly aware that a man as powerful as Tywin Lannister demanded every courtesy. The stable yard bustled with men preparing horses. Ned paused only to ensure the instructions to the gold cloaks were clear. They were to maintain order, show no hostility, and wait for the king's command before taking any action. The city watch was on edge. One spark could start a riot if rumors flew that Tywin meant violence. Within the hour, Ned rode out with a small column of knights and guards, the gold cloaks shining under the sun's feeble light. He was dressed in somber colors, the direwolf sigil of Stark Small on his breast. At his side rode Ser Barristan, white cloak billowing. Behind them, a cluster of men in Baratheon livery displayed the crowned stag. Robert had decided, perhaps wisely, that facing Tywin with a show of royal might right at the gates was necessary. The king himself chose to remain within the city, commanding that Ned greet Lord Tywin formally and escort him to the Red Keep. Robert clearly wanted to appear magnanimous without placing himself in a vulnerable position. Ned sensed the king's fear of losing face. If Tywin came in a tempest of fury, Robert could respond from behind the city walls. As Ned's party passed beneath the massive gatehouse, the crowds parted warily, some craning their necks to see the famed Lord of Casterly Rock approach. A hush settled over the throng as the gold cloaks tried to keep gawkers at a safe distance. Dust kicked up from the horses' hooves, mingling with the scent of sweat and tension. Beyond the gate lay the open road, where Tywin's banners drew closer with every heartbeat. Ned reined in, forming a line across the wide dirt path. Moments later, the Lannister column came into clear view. At its head rode Tywin Lannister himself, resplendent in armor that gleamed with gold accents. His hair was pale blonde, almost white in the bright daylight, and his green eyes flashed with steely resolve. Beside him, standard-bearers held aloft the crimson banner bearing the golden lion. Men-at-arms in lacquered plate formed behind him, disciplined and silent. They drew to a halt a short distance from Ned's party. Tywin surveyed the scene with an expression so composed it bordered on sculpted stone. For a moment, neither side spoke. Ned felt his heart drumming in his chest. At length, Tywin urged his horse a few steps forward, his gaze sliding from Sir Barristan to Ned, then back again. "Lord Hand," he said, voice cool, resonant. "I see the king has seen fit to honor my arrival with a welcome at the gates." Ned inclined his head, keeping his tone courteous. "Lord Tywin, we welcome you to King's Landing. The king awaits you in the Red Keep, where he hopes to discuss certain pressing matters." Tywin arched one eyebrow. "I'm sure he does. How gracious of him to arrange this escort." His tone held the barest edge of sarcasm, as though he recognized the unspoken subtext. The king had chosen not to come in person. Ned steadied himself. "If you would follow us, my lord, we will show you and your party to your accommodations in the keep." Tywin gave a slight nod, though the tension in his posture was unmistakable. He waved a hand and the Lannister guards parted, allowing a smaller entourage of lords and knights to move to the front. Ned recognized Ser Kevan Lannister among them, Tywin's brother, along with a handful of bannermen. The rest of the Lannister host remained in formation, rank upon rank of gold and red surcoats. As Ned turned his horse to lead the procession back into the city, he felt the weight of Tywin's presence like a cold brand against his skin. The ride through the city was uneasy. The residents of King's Landing peered from shutters and doorways, some calling out curses or jests, others watching in fearful silence. The gold cloaks kept them at bay, but the tension crackled. Tywin rode with regal disdain, his eyes straight ahead, occasionally flicking to the side at any jeer or scornful shout. Ned could only imagine how the man felt, riding into a city where his daughter had just been cast aside. Yet Tywin's face remained a mask. Whatever roiled inside him stayed hidden. At last, they passed through the gates of the Red Keep. Courtiers and servants bowed as Tywin dismounted in the courtyard. Ned handed his reins to a stable hand and took a breath, summoning calm. "My lord, we shall go to the throne room, if it pleases you. The king awaits." Tywin handed his horse off without a word, then fixed Ned with a steady glare. "Lead on, Lord Stark." His voice carried the subtle threat of a drawn bowstring. Quiet but undeniable. They walked through the castle corridors, escorted by gold cloaks. The footfalls of Tywin's men echoed off the stone walls, ringing a discordant note in the hush. Outside the massive double doors of the throne room, Ned turned to Tywin. "Your men can wait here, if you please. The king wishes a private audience with you and a select few. For your comfort, of course." Tywin's lips pressed thin, but he nodded, dismissing his bannermen with a sharp gesture. Ser Kevan and a couple of close Lannister allies remained at his side, while the bulk of the retinue waited. Ned made a sign for the guards to open the doors, revealing the cavernous space of the throne room. Torchlight flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. The Iron Throne loomed at the far end, and upon it sat Robert Baratheon, wearing a rich black doublet embroidered with gold thread. He had donned his heavy crown, perhaps to remind Tywin of the power he still held. As Tywin walked forward, his boots clicking on the polished floor, Ned took a position to the side of the throne, standing a little behind Robert. Ser Barristan stood beside him, watchful. A hush fell as Tywin stopped some dozen paces from the throne, meeting Robert's gaze. For a few heartbeats, neither man spoke. The tension was tangible, a breath away from snapping. "Lord Tywin," Robert finally said, his deep voice echoing. "You come well attended. I trust your journey was comfortable." Tywin bowed stiffly. "As comfortable as can be expected, Your Grace. I come to address matters which, if the rumors are correct, have dire implications for my house." His tone was measured, but the undercurrent of anger was clear. Robert shifted in the throne. Well, I'm sure you've heard. I have set aside Cersei. Our marriage is annul." Ned's mouth went dry. It was out in the open now. No softening of language or diplomatic dance. Robert had simply declared it. Tywin's face hardened. "I see," he said, too softly. "You chose to proceed without waiting for my counsel." Robert let out a low laugh that held no humor. "I'm king. I need no man's counsel to decide what is best for my throne." The silence that followed crackled like lightning. Tywin's jaw tightened, but he maintained composure. "You have dishonored House Lannister by dismissing my daughter. The entire realm whispers that you found her unfit. Or worse. Such a slight cannot be borne lightly, Your Grace." The king's glare was equally fierce. "What slight, Lord Tywin? I gave your daughter years of queenship. I gave her everything. She gave me nothing but scorn, no true heirs, no loyalty. Now, for the realm's sake, we have agreed to part. She is free to leave, unscathed with your grandchildren. You should be grateful I've not demanded retribution." "Mass." Tywin's nostrils flared. "Retribution? For what crime?" Robert's lips parted in a grimace. Ned held his breath. He knew the king was moments away from unleashing the secret about the children's parentage, but that would certainly provoke a full-scale war. Quickly, Ned stepped forward, clearing his throat. "My lords, if I may," he said softly, voice carrying through the stillness. Both Robert and Tywin shot him impatient glares, but Ned forced himself to continue. "We have come to an arrangement that spares any claims of wrongdoing. The faith has sanctioned the annulment. The queen, former queen, leaves with her children intact, their inheritance in the Westerlands undisturbed. In return, the crown provides financial restitution and certain trade concessions. A fair exchange to keep the peace." For a moment, Ned wasn't sure either man would even acknowledge him. Then Tywin spoke, each word precise. "I have yet to see these terms in writing, Lord Stark. There is talk, but no assurances. My grandchildren are forcibly removed from the line of succession, are they not?" Robert's glare flickered. "A king can't keep children who aren't." He bit off the words, controlling his temper. "Who aren't his in the line of succession. But they are your blood, Tywin. They'll want for nothing, so long as your house does not move against the crown. That is the agreement." Tywin's jaw clenched. "And if I refuse?" A murmur swept through the courtiers. Ned went rigid, expecting an explosion of anger from Robert. Instead, Robert rose from the throne in one fluid motion. "Refuse?" he repeated, descending the steps. "You stand here with your men outside, and you threaten me in my own hall." His voice rose, echoing. "If you refuse, I'll remind you that the power of the crown rests on more than my presence. The realm will not stand for open rebellion again. We'd see your banners burning. We'd see every last stone of Casterly Rock battered down if it came to it. Is that what you want, Tywin? Another war?" Tywin did not yield an inch. "House Lannister does not fear war, Your Grace. But I did not come to threaten. I came to gather the truth and ensure my daughter's safety. You mention restitution. Present your terms. I will judge if they suffice to preserve the honor of House Lannister." Robert turned to Ned, the implicit command in his eyes. "Handle this." Ned drew a scroll from his sleeve, which had been meticulously drafted in consultation with the Master of Laws and the High Septon's notaries. He stepped forward, offering it to Tywin. "My lord, these are the official terms. Read them at your leisure, but they outline the compensation, gold trade privileges with certain crown ports, and a formal statement that no blame or shame is cast upon the Lady Cersei beyond this dissolution. She remains free from prosecution, and the children likewise." "Nay." Tywin took the scroll without glancing at it, his gaze pinning Ned. "And what of the reason for this dissolution?" he said softly. "What cause does the king cite? Let us hear it plainly." Ned's heart pounded. Robert's face stiffened. The question hung, loaded with danger. If Robert declared that Cersei was unfaithful and that the children were illegitimate, the father-in-law's pride would demand blood. The hush in the throne room felt suffocating as Ned grappled for word. Finally, Robert's voice broke the tension. "We'll say that the Lady Cersei failed to fulfill her conjugal vows, that she withheld from me the wifely duties expected of a queen. It is an archaic reason, but one the High Septon found suitable for the annulment. That is all the realm need know. Let them gossip however they please. Men are to die, sir." Tywin's gaze flicked to the king, studying him as though he sensed the half-lie. But he kept his composure. "And what of Cersei's standing? Does she remain Lady of House Lannister? Or do you and your courtiers mean to call her a whore behind closed doors?" Robert's lips curled. "She remains your daughter, Lord Tywin. I'm done with her. I want no further talk of her. She leaves King's Landing unharmed, and House Lannister receives gold and privileges. That should be enough." "Nabedui." A long silence stretched, so taut it seemed it might snap like a brittle branch. Tywin finally lifted the scroll, unrolled it, and cast his gaze over the lines. Ned watched the tension flicker in his sharp eyes. The hush continued for an interminable span of heartbeats. Then Tywin rolled the parchment again, with a crisp flick of his wrist. "This is your final offer?" he asked flatly. "Yes," Robert growled. "It is." Tywin exhaled, though it was barely audible. He glanced at Kevin and his other men, then turned his gaze back to the king. "Very well. For the sake of sparing bloodshed, House Lannister will accept these terms, on the condition that there be no further slander of my daughter's name. If I hear so much as a whisper from the crown that she was unfaithful, then you will have your war, whether you desire it or not." "Man." Ned saw the flash of anger in Robert's eyes, but the king clenched his jaw. "As you will," Robert said, his voice stiff, arms folded across his broad chest. "Now take your daughter, collect your grandchildren, and depart. The realm has no further need of you in King's Landing." "Nanaraniber." Tywin offered a bow so slight, it barely qualified. Then he turned on his heel, beckoning for Kevin and the others to follow. They walked from the throne room in stately precision, the echo of their boots lingering long after they had gone. The crowd of courtiers began to breathe again, relief and confusion mixing in their hushed chatter. Robert sank heavily onto the throne steps, removing his crown and pressing a hand to his brow. His face shone with sweat. Ned moved closer, stilling his own trembling nerves. "Your Grace, are you well?" Robert let out a ragged sigh. "Well enough. Damn that man's arrogance. But if this ends without bloodshed, perhaps it's worth the humiliation." Ned placed a hand on the king's shoulder, a gesture of quiet support. "We have done what we can, Your Grace." Robert grunted, pushing himself to stand. "Let the rest of them call me coward or fool if they like. I've had enough war in my time. Let Tywin swallow his pride if he can." He turned to Ned. "See to the details. Make sure those trade concessions and gold payments are drawn up properly. I want no excuses for him to claim I broke faith." Ned nodded. "I will, Your Grace. Rest assured." With that, Robert handed Ned the crown and stalked off, leaving Ned feeling the weight of that symbol in his hands. Around them, courtiers began to disperse, gossip on their lips. Sir Barristan gave Ned a small nod, relief evident in his eyes. Perhaps the realm would yet avoid a second rebellion. Perhaps. But deep in his gut, Ned felt the tension remained. Tywin was not a man to let go of a grudge. And Cersei, who knew what she might do once she realized her father was here in force? The city remained a tinderbox. Yet for the moment, no swords clashed, no banners were called in open defiance. It was, Ned reflected, the best outcome he could have hoped for under the circumstances. By midday, Tywin and his smaller retinue had entered the royal apartments where Cersei and her children had been staying in a separate wing, under watch by the Kingsguard. The corridors were kept clear of onlookers, but word reached Ned that father and daughter had locked themselves away for a private audience. Not a soul dared interrupt. Ned could only imagine the fury Tywin might unleash behind closed doors. He pictured the proud lion, demanding explanations, and Cersei, no less proud, likely giving her own version of events. Whatever they said, it would be a confrontation weighted with heartbreak and anger. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen were presumably nearby, uncertain of their future. Ned felt a pang of pity for the children, though he reminded himself that their very existence had been a spark waiting to set the realm ablaze. He hoped for all their sakes that this quiet settlement might hold. Shortly thereafter, news reached Ned that Tywin intended to depart by dusk the following day. He would escort Cersei and the children back to Casterly Rock, as the king had demanded. Carriages would be prepared for the long journey west. It seemed too smooth, too convenient. And yet, if they left without incident, perhaps the city could begin to breathe again. Ned spent the afternoon drafting the final documents to formalize the crown's obligations under the settlement. He penned instructions for the Master of Coin, who would arrange for gold shipments to be delivered to Casterly Rock at intervals. He authored letters granting Lannister ships favorable docking fees in King's Landing's harbor for a period of 5 years. All of it was tedious, but crucial if the king's word was to hold. By evening, the air felt oppressively heavy. Clouds gathered on the horizon as Ned walked the outer walls, scanning for any sign of unrest. The gold cloaks doubled their watch, mindful that Tywin's soldiers still encamped outside the city, albeit peaceably. Inside, the mood was subdued, as though everyone held their breath to see if a single match might ignite the fuse. Ned paused at a high vantage point, gazing down at the campfires that dotted the plain outside King's Landing's main gate. A regiment of Lannister men surrounded Tywin's grand pavilion. They made no hostile moves, but the message was clear. House Lannister was here in force, and if the king did anything to harm Cersei or the children, it could lead to immediate conflict. Footsteps sounded behind him. He turned to see Petyr Baelish, Littlefinger, approaching with that sly smile on his lips. "A fine view, my lord Hand," he said lightly, leaning against the battlement. "I hear you've been busy forging new trade privileges for the Lions. How noble of you to keep the peace." Ned stiffened, feeling an instinctive distrust. "If you have words to say them, Lord Baelish." Littlefinger gave a small laugh. "No words, truly, other than my admiration for your skillful negotiations. You've walked a dangerous path these past few days. Yet you seem to have brought the king and Tywin to let's call it a grudging agreement. I wonder, though, at what cost to your beloved sense of honor?" "Memterbur." Ned's jaw tensed. "I did what was necessary." Of course, necessity. Such a convenient mantle for compromise. Still, I must commend you. Few men can claim they've parted a king and queen without at least one head rolling. Ned turned away, not wanting to engage in Littlefinger's games. "If that is all, I have business to attend to." Baelish grinned and offered a mocking bow. "Then I shall leave you to it, my lord Hand. Farewell, and do let me know if there's any small service I can offer. I do so enjoy being of help in times of great change." With that, he ambled off, humming softly, leaving Ned feeling as though a viper had just slithered away. Night fell, bringing with it an eerie quiet. The Red Keep's corridors were half lit by torches, and many lords kept to their chambers, either out of caution or weariness. Ned found sleep elusive. He paced his chamber, glancing at the half-packed trunk in the corner. He had ordered it prepared in case war broke out, and he needed to send his daughters north swiftly. The trunk had become a silent reminder of the fragility of the peace they were attempting to preserve. When dawn came, gray and dull, it found Ned still bleary-eyed but resolute. This would be the day Tywin and Cersei departed. If they left without incident, perhaps the worst was over. If there were to be a confrontation, it would likely be today. He dressed in his formal attire as the king's hand, pinned on the silver direwolf of House Stark, and made his way to the courtyard where the Lannister column was assembling. Cersei stood near an ornate carriage, her hair pulled back tightly, her face drawn and pale. Beside her, Joffrey glowered at the gathering gold cloaks. while Marcella clutched a small bag, eyes downcast. Tommen looked on the verge of tears, though he tried to stand tall. Tywin was there, of course, overseeing the packing with cold efficiency. Ned approached carefully, aware that any misstep could ignite tempers. He inclined his head. "My lady," he said to Cersei. "Lord Tywin, we stand ready to see you off." Cersei barely acknowledged him. Tywin gave a clipped nod. "We depart immediately. I have no intention of loitering in this city." From the corner of his eye, Ned saw Jaime Lannister approach in his white Kingsguard cloak. He wondered whether Jaime would remain in King's Landing or accompany his family. It seemed Jaime had come only to say farewell, for he exchanged quiet words with Cersei, his expression tense. Something unspoken passed between them, loyalty, regret, or perhaps a vow of vengeance. Ned couldn't be certain, but the moment felt charged. Meanwhile, Robert appeared at the head of the courtyard stairs, wearing no crown, only a simple black tunic. He looked as though he'd spent the night in drink again, hair disheveled, eyes bloodshot. Yet he held himself with a king's authority as he addressed Tywin. "Lord Tywin," he said, voice resonant despite the early hour. "We trust that once you return to the Westerlands, your house will remember this day as one of peace, not war." Tywin bowed again. That same minimal gesture. "That remains to be seen, Your Grace. But we have no appetite for war, so long as our name is not besmirched." Robert's mouth twisted in a sneer, but he said only, "Then go in peace." He glanced at Cersei. "You have my word. No harm shall come to you or yours from the crown, provided you keep your father's word." Cersei met Robert's gaze for a moment, something like bitterness turning her features hard. She offered no curtsy, no polite farewell. Instead, she turned sharply, calling for her children to enter the carriage. Joffrey muttered a curse under his breath but followed. Myrcella and Tommen climbed inside as well. Tywin lingered a moment, as though expecting Robert to say something more. But the king stood silent, arms crossed, jaw clenched. With a final glance around, Tywin moved to mount his horse. Kevan joined him, and soon the column began to file out of the courtyard in orderly ranks. Ned stepped aside, letting the carriage roll past, escorted by lines of Lannister men-at-arms. Many in the Red Keep's retinue stood watching from the balconies, the tension giving way to a cautious sense of relief. The gold cloaks parted at the main gate, allowing the column to exit. The clatter of hooves and wheels gradually faded as they wound down the steep roads leading from the keep. Soon, all that remained were drifting motes of dust in the air, and the echoes of hushed murmurs. Robert let out a breath that sounded like a long-held sigh of exhaustion. "They're gone," he said. "By the gods, they're gone." Ned took a measured breath. "Yes, Your Grace. I pray they remain peaceful now that their demands have been met." "Nivis and..." Robert turned to him, eyes weary. "We will keep our ravens at the ready. If Tywin stirs trouble in the west, we'll know soon enough. But for now, I'll not dwell on it. I'll not dwell on any of it." He started back toward the keep, footsteps dragging. Ned watched him go, a swirl of sympathy and apprehension twisting in his gut. Over the next hours, the city bristled with rumor and speculation. Some claimed the Lannisters would take the children to Old Town to hide them. Others said Tywin would forge a new alliance, seeking a marriage between Joffrey and a powerful noble family as a signal that they still had royal ambitions. Still others whispered that Cersei would never forgive this public humiliation, and would find a way to destroy Robert from afar. The chatter was endless, but for the moment, no swords were drawn. In the Red Keep, Ned set about dealing with the aftermath. He convened the small council, minus Littlefinger, who claimed pressing business elsewhere, to address the realm's immediate concerns. Renly Baratheon arrived in the council chamber, looking somewhat relieved that the day had passed without bloodshed. Ser Barristan joined as well, stoic as ever, though Ned saw the faint lines of worry at the corners of the old knight's eyes. Pycelle, feigning ignorance, offered congratulatory remarks on preserving the peace, but Ned suspected the old maester had known more than he let on. They discussed the next steps, drafting letters to other major houses to reassure them that the realm remained stable, that the king had chosen a new course, and expected no interference. They agreed that, for the sake of calm, the matter of Robert's remarriage should be handled delicately, with suitable time to pass before any new betrothal was arranged. Renly seemed eager to propose potential brides, perhaps from House Tyrell, he hinted. But Ned frowned at the idea, urging patience. Another hasty marriage could stoke the fires of scandal anew. The realm needed a cooling period, time to mend. As the sun set that day, Ned walked through the keep's corridors feeling the profound weight of recent events settle on him. Could it truly be over so cleanly? He knew better. A lion cornered was still a lion, and Cersei, along with Tywin, had suffered a grave humiliation. No matter the gold, no matter the trade privileges, House Lannister's pride had taken a blow. Someday, Ned feared that pride would demand compensation. At supper, the mood was subdued but noticeably lighter than in days prior. Court ladies gossiped in corners about the now former queen's departure, while knights speculated about whether the king would announce a new queen soon. Arya slipped into the hall, ignoring protocol, and found Ned at the high table. She complained about the hush in the corridors, how the city felt like a ghost. Sansa was more decorous, but it was clear she too was uneasy. Ned gave them gentle reassurances, though in truth, he felt uncertain. He did not want to burden his daughters with the knowledge that this fragile peace might yet crack. Robert eventually strode in, half drunk as usual, but not in a rage. He ate little, drank much, and left early, muttering about needing fresh air. The courtiers let him pass without comment. Even Sansa, once enraptured by the idea of royal romance, watched her king with pity. In a single stroke, Robert had ended his marriage and cast aside the family that had once been central to the throne's power. Now, in the hush of the great hall, he resembled a man adrift, a king with no queen, no heirs, and more regrets than joys. That night, Ned took a turn in the castle gardens, seeking a moment of reflection. The moon was nearly full, illuminating the hedges and fountains with silver light. He paused by a statue of some long-dead Targaryen king, vines climbing its legs, as he let himself dwell on the path he had chosen. He had effectively concealed the truth of Cersei's children to prevent immediate war, but lies had a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply buried. If the truth about Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen ever became widely known, would not the realm erupt into an even greater conflict? He could only hope that by then, Robert might have found a more stable path, or the Lannisters would be too preoccupied to wage war. He closed his eyes, remembering the laughter of his children back in Winterfell, remembering the sense of honor that once guided him so unerringly. The city had a way of turning honor into compromise. Yet he reassured himself that he had done it for the right reasons, to save lives, to protect the innocent. The old gods might understand, or so he prayed. Days passed, and the Lannister host cleared away entirely, heading west. The watchers on the city walls reported no signs of aggression. The campfires vanished from the plains. Traders coming from the Westerlands spoke of Tywin traveling hard without delay to reach Casterly Rock. Word spread that the former queen had locked herself in her chambers there, refusing most visitors. There were rumors of her weeping at night, rumors of her swearing vengeance, rumors of her writing letters to other lords. The stories varied wildly, but the gist was the same. Cersei had returned to her father's domain in disgrace. Within King's Landing, Robert resumed a semblance of normal governance, holding court sessions where petitioners asked for judgments on property disputes, trade agreements, and small matters of law. Ned dutifully stood at his side, advising where he could, all the while scanning the crowd for any sign of Lannister spies or dissenters. The tension had not vanished, only receded. A city as large as King's Landing always held pockets of unrest, but for the moment, no open riots threatened. About a week after the departure, Renly cornered Ned in a corridor. The younger Baratheon wore a thoughtful expression. "You do realize my good brother has put himself in a precarious position, yes? No wife, no heir. Officially, anyway. And the realm expecting a royal wedding eventually. That leaves quite the vacuum." He paused, glancing around to ensure no eavesdroppers were near. "I'm curious, Ned. Do you think Robert might name me as heir if he fails to marry again? Or do you think he'll look to Stannis on Dragonstone?" The question unsettled Ned. He chose his words carefully. Robert has not spoken of heirs to me since the annulment. He's in no hurry to discuss such matters, I suspect. But the law would favor Stannis, as his elder brother. Renly made a small face. Stannis. Gods, the man's as rigid as a post. Robert might not relish the thought of that any more than the realm would. But if no new heirs come, that's the way of it, I suppose. He flicked an invisible speck of dust from his sleeve. Yet you, Ned, might have influence. If you thought it wise, you could whisper in Robert's ear about a more amenable successor. Ned shook his head firmly. I will not meddle in the line of succession, Renly. And neither should you if you cherish peace. Renly sighed. Peace. Yes, you do love your peace, Lord Stark. Well, so be it. But watch carefully. The realm abhors a vacuum, and Robert can't drink away this problem forever. None? With that, Renly was gone, leaving Ned with a fresh layer of worry. Indeed, the question of succession loomed in the background. The realm had no recognized heir, now that Joffrey and his siblings were set aside. Would Robert seek a new bride among the powerful houses? Would Tywin or Cersei attempt to claim something later, if Robert died unexpectedly? In Westeros, no power void remained empty for long. As another fortnight passed without incident, some of the tension began to ease. The city slowly returned to its old routine. Crowded markets, distant peasants streaming in with goods, the usual swirl of intrigue in the Red Keep. Sansa resumed her lessons in the castle. Arya slipped back into her sword lessons with Syrio Forel, and Ned tackled the daily tasks of the hand. Perhaps the realm truly had stepped back from the brink. But late one night, a raven arrived from Riverrun, bearing ill news. House Tully had received word that some of the Western bannermen were mustering forces near the border with the Riverlands. Nothing overt, just small gatherings, but enough to raise alarm. Was Tywin massing his strength in secret? Ned read the message under candlelight, heart pounding anew. If Tywin were building an army, it might be a prelude to hostilities. The Tully bannermen would not sit idle while a potential invasion loomed. A single border skirmish could ignite a broader conflict, especially given the old grievances between the Lannisters and Tullys. Without waking the king, Robert had already drunk himself into a stupor, then summoned the Master of Whispers. Varys glided into the small chamber, eyes flickering with curiosity. Lord Stark, he said softly, you have summoned me at a late hour. What troubles you this night? Ned handed Varys the Raven scroll. Read this. It seems the Lannisters may be gathering more men in the Western Hills. Word has reached Riverrun. Could it be they're preparing for war? Varys scanned the parchment, his face impassive. It is possible they are simply reinforcing their defenses, my lord. After all, the annulment was a severe blow. Lord Tywin may wish to ensure no one dares strike at his house during this moment of perceived weakness. Nas. Ned's lips pressed together. Or he could be planning to strike first. Varys looked thoughtful. That is also possible. Tywin is not a man prone to letting insults fade. He may feign compliance, only to bide his time until he can strike advantageously. What do you propose, Lord Stark? Ned felt a sharp pang of weariness. We must confirm the rumors. Send your little birds, your spies, to gather solid proof. If Tywin is building an army, we must prepare the king and the realm. But if it's a false alarm, I do not wish to raise Robert's ire or risk calling the banners unnecessarily. Neither. Varys inclined his head. As you command. I will do what I can to ascertain the truth. Before leaving, Varys paused, a faint flicker of emotion crossing his face. We walk a dangerous line, my lord Hand. Already you have accomplished the near impossible by ending the royal marriage without immediate war. But the slightest push now could send the realm into chaos. I hope you are ready for what comes next, whether it be peace or sword. Ned did not answer. He saw the hint of concern in Varys' eyes, and realized the eunuch might genuinely fear for the realm's future. In that moment, Ned almost felt empathy for the Master of Whisperers, a man often seen as manipulative and cunning. Perhaps even cunning men could want peace, if only to preserve themselves. 2 days later, fresh news arrived via travelers. Lannister troops were indeed assembling. Not a full host, but more than a mere defensive force. The travelers spoke of seeing columns of men drilling in field camps, banners snapping in the wind. They heard rumors that Cersei Lannister had urged her father to act swiftly, to avenge her honor. Yet there was no official word from Casterly Rock, no declaration of war. Ned, faced with these tidings, felt the dread return like a twisting knife. He met with Robert and shared the reports. The king's response was a fierce scowl, but also a grim resignation. I expected no less from Tywin. He won't rest until he feels we've paid for humiliating him. Let him gather his spears if he likes. I won't cower. Ned pressed. Your Grace, if the Lannisters strike the Riverlands, House Tully will call for aid. That draws in the north, the Vale, and potentially even the Reach. We risk another rebellion, as large as the last. Robert's eyes flared. Better to crush them if they move, Ned. I'm not the boy I was at the Trident, but I've still got fight in me. Gods, I'd prefer not to do it, but if Tywin wants war, we'll give it to him. Ned fought to keep his voice calm. We should attempt one last diplomatic effort. Send an envoy to Casterly Rock, demand an explanation. If it fails, at least we can say we tried every avenue before raising our banners. New and true. Robert slammed his hand on the table, rattling a flagon of wine. Fine. Send a damn envoy. Who do you suggest? Ned paused, considering. Sending anyone too close to Robert might be seen as an insult. Sending a neutral party who had some measure of Lannister respect might be wiser. But there were few candidates who carried weight with Tywin. At length, Ned said, perhaps Sir Barristan could go. He is known for his honor and has served the realm under multiple kings. Tywin might at least receive him civilly. This. Robert raked his fingers through his beard. Barristan's too valuable to me here. I need him if the lions do storm across the border. I won't risk losing my Lord Commander. Anyone else? Ned thought of Tyrion Lannister. The imp. He was known to have a mind of his own. But Tyrion was away on his own travels, possibly outside the city's reach. Jaime Lannister? That was out of the question. Another idea surfaced. Perhaps Lord Kevin Lannister would be willing to act as mediator. He is Tywin's brother, after all. Robert snorted. Kevin is too loyal to Tywin. That's like sending a sheep to reason with the butcher, or the other way around. No. He tapped his fingers restlessly. We need someone with no direct ties to the Lannisters, but who can speak with authority. Ned met the king's gaze and saw the frustration there. They were trapped in a cycle of suspicion. I will see who among the minor lords might serve, Ned finally said. Someone whose house is neither too high nor too low, but carries enough dignity that Tywin can't simply dismiss them. We'll attempt to reason with him. Failing that, we must prepare for war. Tywin, boss? Robert nodded, scowling at the prospect. So be it. But do it swiftly. Ned bowed and left. He felt an immense weariness. The annulment had been meant to stave off conflict, yet it seemed to have only delayed the inevitable. Tywin was mustering men, the realm was uneasy, and Robert was half hoping for a fight to prove he was still the warrior he had once been. Ned feared that one slip, one errant arrow loosed on a border patrol, might unleash the bloodshed they had tried so hard to avoid. Amid these troubles, Sansa approached Ned one evening, her face pale. Father, she said quietly, is it true the Lannisters might march on us? Some of the ladies say war is coming. They say the king. They say the king. They say the king might call his banners. Her voice trembled. Must we flee? Will they hurt us? Ned knelt to look her in the eye. My dear Sansa, calm yourself. We do not know that the Lannisters will march. These are rumors. If danger comes, I will see you and Arya safely north, that I promise. Tears welled in Sansa's eyes. I wish we had never come here. I wish none of this had happened. No. Ned swallowed, hugging her gently. I know. So do I. Days stretched into weeks as messages flew back and forth. Ned selected a discreet envoy, a cousin of House Redwine with some experience in diplomacy, and sent him west to speak with Tywin. He carried a letter in which the king demanded an explanation for the Lannisters' military preparations. along with a reminder of the treaty that had ended the marriage. Weeks passed with no reply. Ravens brought only cryptic reports of Lannister movements, fresh recruits mustering, supplies stockpiled. Tension rose in the Riverlands, with Lord Hoster Tully reinforcing key crossings along the Red Fork. Everywhere, men anticipated the worst. One gray afternoon, Ned stood in the courtyard when a battered rider galloped through the gates. Dust and sweat caked his face, and the horse lathered. The man, a courier from Riverrun, practically fell from the saddle, gasping for breath. Ned rushed forward, alarmed by the courier's state. Between gulps of air, the courier thrust a sealed parchment at Ned. From Lord Hoster. Urgent news. Lannister outriders. Skirmish near the border. They took captives. Ned's stomach lurched. He ripped open the seal and scanned the message. It confirmed the courier's words. A small band of Lannister outriders had crossed into Tully lands, clashing with local guards. Several men were killed, more taken prisoner. House Tully demanded a royal response. Ned cursed under his breath. This was precisely the spark he had feared. He hurried to find Robert, who was in his solar with a cluster of courtiers. The king's eyes flared at the news. So Tywin's made his move, he spat. Gods, I knew it would come to this. Summon the lords, call the banners if need be. I will not sit idle while the lions raid the Riverlands. Ned tried to keep calm, though his heart thundered. Your Grace, we do not yet know if this was a sanctioned raid or a rogue band. We should send word to Tywin, demand restitution. Perhaps we can still avoid. Robert shook his head in a fury. Damn your caution, Ned. They've spilled blood. We can't appear weak. If we do nothing, Tywin will only grow bolder. He whirled on the courtiers. Summon the council. Rouse the city watch. Let it be known that if Lannister men cross our borders and kill our folk, we will answer in kind. As the king vented his rage, Ned stood there, the letter crumpled in his hand, feeling the weight of all their efforts crumble like a wall of sand. They had tried so hard to free themselves from the web of that cursed marriage, to buy peace with gold and concessions. Yet here they stood, on the edge of open conflict once more. He thought of the banners that would soon wave across the realm. The direwolf of Stark, the trout of Tully, the falcon of Arryn, the rose of Tyrell, perhaps even the kraken of Greyjoy seeking advantage in chaos. And always, the golden lion of Lannister, stalking them all. He closed his eyes, letting Robert's angry voice fade to a dull roar. The realm was poised for another rebellion. Perhaps not in name, but in all the ways that mattered. Men sharpening swords, ravens streaking across the sky, alliances forming in secret corners. For all his efforts, for all the deals struck to secure a quiet end to the royal marriage, Ned Stark felt in his bones that the Seven Kingdoms would soon know blood again. He bowed his head, silently praying to the old gods that somehow, at the last moment, peace might still be salvaged. But the ring of iron and the call of vengeance echoed in his mind, a dire warning that war's shadow had not truly lifted. It merely waited, gathering strength. And so he stood, consumed by the dread certainty that in undoing one marriage, they had only unleashed a storm that now loomed across the horizon, ready to break upon them all.